Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 15 minutes for this episode in the Nick of Time with Anand joining us today to talk about low code, no code. So stay tuned. We'll get started in about 15 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 12, 13 minutes with this new episode of In the Nick of Time with Anand joining us today to talk about low code, no code, and why his stack is different from the one we know. So that's going to be interesting. We'll talk a little bit about the vendor lock-in aspect of low code, no code, and limitations of it. And maybe we will disagree. We'll see. Stay tuned. We'll get started in about 12 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. In the meantime, if you want to put your name and your company you're with in the chat, in the comment section below, we'll be able to highlight you on the screen as well. If you have questions for Anand about low code, no code, feel free to ask it as well in the comment section below. In the meantime, please hold on. We're just about 9-10 minutes to get started. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 7 minutes, 8 minutes. We'll talk about low code, no code today. So if you want to share also your name and who you're with, we can highlight you on the screen as well. That's going to be fun. Also, if you have questions for Anand, please make sure to put it into the comment section below and start with a Q so we know it's a question as well. Stay tuned. We'll get started in about 7 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes now. Please stay tuned. We're going to talk about low code, no code with Anand today, and we'll also take your questions live. So please make sure to put your questions into the comment section below. And also, if you want to share who you're with and who you are in the comment, we can highlight your profile as well. Stay tuned. We get started in about 5 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 3-4 minutes now. Please don't forget to put your name and what company you're with so we can highlight you in the section below. Also, if you have questions, start with a Q and ask it into the comment section as well. We get started with Anand in about 3 minutes now to talk about low code, no code. Stay tuned. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this episode of In the Nick of Time. Today with Anand, we're going to be talking about low code, no code. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun. Lots of good questions already on LinkedIn. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody to please do register for the AMA so you can get the emails reminding you of the schedule. We're going to have pretty amazing guests in the next few weeks. We're going to have Lauren Nolsenberger, the Air Force and Space Force CIO. We're going to have Jay Bonchi, the Air Force and Space Force Chief Technology Officer. And we're going to have John Olson, the acting Chief Data and AI Officer of the Air Force and Space Force, and the first one ever. And we have plenty of amazing guests lined up. I'm also looking for more names. If you have cool people that you know, that should be good guests for us to have on the show. Please make sure you go on the LinkedIn post and comment on the LinkedIn post that I just posted this morning asking for names. I have a few lined up, but that will be for April and May timeframe. So let's do that, please. Want to have maybe some people coming out of the .mil, so maybe .gov or Stand Local, or even companies. Love to get some of their feedback on the adoption of DevSecOps and how they are bringing innovation into their commercial organizations as well. So that could be fun. All right, so don't forget to register. Also, we have a page, a LinkedIn page for In the Nick of Time. So if you don't mind following that page, we're going to be posting dedicated content there on cyber and DevSecOps. So if you want to follow what's going on with DevSecOps, you probably want to follow that LinkedIn page as well. Most of the content will come from that page now and not from my account. So that's going to be something good to do. So please follow that page as well. Also, if you want to ask a question, always put it into the comment section below. Start with a Q. If you just want to share you're here, please do that. Put your name and your company. And I'm so happy always to see some of our recurring guests today with Yolanda, Gerald, Marjorie, and many others. So thanks so much for joining us today. Alex is here too. Let's talk a little bit about low-code, no-code, and I wanted to do a little bit of an open dialogue, of course. But before we do that, I wanted to share a little bit of my thoughts on low-code, no-code, and then we'll bring Anand as well to give first his background, but also what he's been working on for the last couple of years on with Crybotics and why he thinks it's different from what we know. So low code, no code, I guess it's pretty broad. You may have seen on the comments when I announced the show about low code, no code that we had many people tell us they have different solutions for low code, no code. Some have products like Salesforce and others, right? So it could be very small or very big. Some are obviously commercial organizations, and really the goal is to, I guess, pretty much abstract or remove the coding aspect, or at the very much limit it with low code, and enable teams to create capabilities. And usually, I would argue it's often limited when it comes to features, although you see platform becoming more and more complex, which could become kind of a pretty big beast to maintain and sustain. So some of my fear when I started, I remember when I started in the Air Force with a lot of the generals there telling me that we needed every airman to code, and I just always disagreed with that. I don't think that's a good idea at all. I think we do need some good airman coders, but I don't think everybody should code, just like I don't think everybody should be a jet fighter pilot or should be a doctor or a lawyer. Some people still believe that coding is just a side hustle or a side gig, and I really think it's a job. And if you want to do it right, and you want to be able to do that at scale, and you want to do it securely with cyber baked in, it's a really complex thing. And so letting everybody build things in a vacuum also is a problem. We've seen many of the Air Force wings create the same capabilities multiple times, always thinking they're unique and solve the biggest problems since the creation of the universe. But the fact is, we had other capabilities already in place. They just didn't know about it. So one of the issues, of course, is the lack of ability to share capabilities across the department. And that's a real problem, of course. If people don't know that something exists, you can blame them from reinventing the wheel. At the same time, if you let everybody code in a vacuum and everybody can do that with a low-code, no-code platform, well, obviously you enable that at scale, that could become a problem. So I'm not saying there's no place for low-code, no-code. I think, particularly on the business side, not on the weapon side, obviously, but I think on the business side, I think the ability for teams to create simple things. What I also see as a impediment with the adoption of low code, no code is that you may start small, and then you're going to create something more and more complex, and at some point you might realize, wait a minute, this is actually something that's getting more and more difficult to maintain, and at some point you realize, you know what. The low code no code platform I'm using is not capable of going where I need to go, and now you have to completely rewrite everything you built. And as you know, low code no code comes with a pretty significant vendor lock-in for most platforms, not all platforms, but most platforms at least create this kind of secret sauce spaghetti code that you can reuse. So there's definitely an aspect of vendor lock-in, and by vendor lock-in, it's not just, hey, I can decide to walk away from the product and still use it. But if you cannot modify it, then you're stuck in time, and that's not good, which is effectively a complete vendor lock-in. So some people say, oh, you can use my platform and still be able to export it, and then you can use it as much as you want. That's good. But the fact is, that's still a big vendor lock-in if you can update it, or if you're stuck in time and you want to add more features, or you want to change things, and you just can't do that with other platforms. So there's different aspects of vendor lock-in there, something to think about. So I certainly agree there is a place for low code, no code. I think the key is to have some type of organizational structure. You can't just let everybody code. You can't also let every wing or every team on the planet create the same capabilities in vacuums. That creates a lot of redundant work, and then we have to sustain it. And I've seen so many great concepts being brought to life by a single airman, and that airman ends up leaving or moving to a different part of the Air Force, and now you don't have anyone to manage it. So that's definitely an issue, and that's something that we need to think about. So I think a key piece to have a successful implementation of low code no code is certainly one to pay attention to the vendor lock-in aspect and be tracking the limitation of the platform. Two is to understand if it's capable of following the DevSecOps mindset. Most of the low code no code platforms are not capable of integrating into a DevSecOps platform, which effectively means you have a completely siloed release process, very often not following the Kubernetes containerized continuous ATO mindset that we created in the Air Force, Space Force, and DoD. So now you can't use that. So you're using a different release process, most of the time with very limited visibility on how this works, based on the product that you're using in terms of a low code no code platform. And so that's all things to think about. But then if you want to have a successful implementation, you certainly want to make sure you're tracking the work being done, who is doing the work, who's going to maintain it, is it an enterprise scale work, and how to scale across teams. If a team is building something pretty cool, is that able to meet the needs of 85% of the Air Force? And if not, what's the delta, and how do we augment that work and avoid teams building things in vacuums? And again, that's all to do with of course, the silos, and the Eric is talking about the stovepipes here of DoD, silos, but it's also driven by egos, sometimes also driven by lack of awareness. Often because of the size of the organization, we don't know what's going on. Even I, as a chief software officer, was not tracking maybe 10% of the software being done in the department, despite trying pretty hard. So I can understand that most people don't have the visibility we need. That's why we need a marketplace. That's why we need a way to be able to share these lessons learned. And more importantly, I think it's important to really assign work. And it's like microservice teams, right? If you don't cut your your work into the right teams, and you do it based on domain-driven design and who is going to do what, you're going to have redundant work or work that's tightly coupled, and that's just not going to go well. And so enabling every team in DoD, every wing, to create their business management thing is probably not a good idea, because unless all the other wings agree to use that one, or merge or partner on building this thing, it's going to be a lot of redundant work, and it's not going to solve the broader problem of building an enterprise capability. And at worst case, it's actually going to create more silos and more sustainment work, which would take money away from funding an enterprise solution that could have worked being built in a traditional way with development teams. So there's the other side of that, right? Is okay, maybe we could have put a bunch of experts and build something custom and make it happen faster. Who knows, right? So all questions we're going to be asking with Anand today. So I'm gonna bring up on the screen. I'm gonna give him a heads up because his face is gonna show up. So here we go. Welcome, Anand. Thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Hey, doing great, Nick. Thanks so much for inviting me and having me on the show. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and so first wanted to share with people that don't know you, a little bit of your background. Of course, you're the founder and CEO of Crowdbotics. I can't pronounce it, but that's my French accent. And you're a former National Science Foundation PhD. Of course, I don't have a degree, so you win on that one. No big deal. Small degree too at an NSF, no big deal. And you also are Berkeley and CSAI researcher with dozens of publications. You launched 2 VC-baked startups. You raised 40 million. You helped bring over 1,000 products. That's a lot. You beat me on that one. I'm a little upset about it. And some of these products, of course, are used at Google and even in the Air Force and Facebook and more. Facebook is not maybe your biggest achievement. But,
maybe we'll take that one off the list as our.
Yeah, maybe it's time. Plus, it's called Meta now, so who cares? So, and people that want to follow you on LinkedIn, right? So that's the link for them to check you out and maybe reach out to you if they have questions. But let's talk a little bit about first you and your background, and you can maybe give us a little bit of a rundown on your journey.
Sure. So always exciting to talk about my own life and career, though I think it's probably a little bit less exciting than yours. As you mentioned, I got my start as a researcher at UC Berkeley. I was backed my PhD by the National Science Foundation. I'm in mathematics and operations research. I pivoted into computer science. Spent a lot of time building out interesting projects around platforms, research into crowdsourcing, and more. Straight out of graduate school, I launched a company that was venture-backed. We went through the accelerator Y Combinator, and we built a software product that was used by Google and more. The company still running today, did reasonably well. It was an enterprise sales technology product. And while we were building this company, we found a problem that was faced by most venture-backed tech companies at the time, which was that we had this product that was based on some innovative research out of UC Berkeley. It was some hard-hitting secret sauce, but we spent only maybe 10% of our time and energy on this technically difficult problem. 90% of our effort was being spent on the problem of how to get this interesting innovation packaged up and built into a software product deployed out into the world. And maybe this is sounding familiar from some of the challenges being faced inside government. 90% of our time was being spent on the basic machinery of secure deployment, authentication workflows, database integrations, charts and visualizations, the kinds of things that are the same consistently between every software product.
It should be a commodity, right? Yeah.
Should be a commodity, exactly. And when we looked at the market to see what was available to help us build faster, we, like many others, found low-code, no-code solutions out there, right? And there's lots of these out there that are enterprise-facing, right? There's the well-known ones popularized by Salesforce, but there's also the category that's defined or that invented the term low-code, no-code. These are companies like Mendix, Appian, OutSystems, um, some smaller players, Betty Blocks, all of which have this promise that you can snap together applications visually. But unfortunately, software
with
engineers say,
no vendor lock-in. They claim there's no vendor lock-in. So that's the claim.
well, they claim this, right? But if we ask the question, how many venture-backed successful software companies have we heard of that were built just on those no-code, no-code tools, right? There aren't really any, right? These are being used by teams inside the enterprise who are building things that are maybe not mission critical or that are limited in capacity or scope. And software engineers, like us, we don't like using those tools at the end of the day because at some point you run up against a limitation. You are forced to stop what you are doing because the platform no longer supports some custom capability that you want to add. And we end up starting over again, going back to software built in open source frameworks that we can know, modify, understand. And that's been the state of the art for so long in software engineering versus low code that those platforms have real barriers for us. So 5 years ago, I was looking at this landscape and said, is there a better way that we can build low code, no code style systems? Ones that will give you the ability to build using commodity parts, off the shelf reusable components, that allow less technical users to get started in building and specifying product, but that under the hood allows you to continue to work inside actual code and real open source frameworks. Meaning, can you build products that allow you to construct applications or specify applications using less technical users, but actually generate code in a way that is safe or compliant or something that end users will actually like who are software engineers. So that was the impetus for the current company, Crowdbotics. We've been building it for the last 5 years. We've had some good traction. The core idea is that we have a product that is sometimes categorized as low code, no code, because it is visual. It allows people to specify and assemble applications using modular parts, but that under the hood, it is building actual Git repositories with commits that are translating each of these visual actions into something that a software engineer can inherit, modify, and change.
And just to clarify, right, people have access to that Git repo. It's not just for you guys that they don't get to see what's behind the scene, right?
That's exactly right. So everything is.
That's a big difference, right? Because most local no-code platforms don't show you how their brain system engine behaves and think, right? So you don't get to see the back end, right?
That's absolutely right. So from day one, when you build on Crowdbotics, you can try this out yourself. You get the actual Git repo from the get-go. You can see the actual commits that are being made. And you can also eject if you want to. You can go back and forth between building in Git as a software engineer or using the online platform to actually construct and modify what you're doing. And that back and forth model allows you to stay compatible with the ways that software engineers want to build. If it's faster to build in visual tools or using parts, great. If it's faster to commit and start writing code, great. And if you exceed the capacities of what can be done through the online platform, great. Hop into Git, get what you need done, and build from there. So this is a really different approach than most of the low-code, no-code landscape. It's designed to be a platform that has some of the ease of use capabilities of low-code, no-code, but more importantly, is a system that the CIO can love and that the software engineering teams inside the organization can love. One of the interesting reasons that low-code, no-code gets so much hype these days is that there's the idea that a lot of domain knowledge about what needs to get built for an organization or a team to achieve its mission is inside the knowledge of domain experts. Practitioners know it.
That's for sure real. Yeah.
But the problem is that if everybody in the organization is building code of this type, on a low-code, no-code system, you have issues with lock-in, yes, but more than that, extensibility. You can't build on top of what is being built. Security, do you really know what has been built? Can you look at the code? And then auditability, right? Especially in a defense context or a government context, you really need to be able to look at the code and say, here is what it is specifically doing, which has been historically difficult. So with CrowdVotics, we've addressed these challenges in a somewhat different way. The lock-in is we say it's non-existent, of course, but the right way to put this is it keeps us honest. You're building.
There's always some look-in, but it's I would actually agree with you that you minimized it.
We've minimized it, right? You can decouple from our systems when you want to. The applications that are generated from scratch in a code base that you have access to in Git from day one. You can intersperse your own team's direct commits into that repo with commits from the platform. And the applications are containerized, meaning you can take them and deploy them.
That's a big one too, right? So you delivering containerized bits, and you have the Git repo. So one might agree that you're really not locked in. The only time you would be locked in, and maybe you can give us that answer, is there libraries or things that the code is using that requires a license for me to use it?
Yeah, great question. So we generally have customers. Customers will have IP assignment as part of the process. So as they are building, they can take the code and go with it. So we don't lock this up in that sense.
So the code, so the entirety of the code that's generated, even if it had some of your initial IP that you guys created to make it easier for people to build, that fancy feature you were talking about of whatever feature, right? That code is then usable even if they stop paying your product without paying a license for that code.
Yep, that is absolutely correct. And the way we think about this is, and this is similar to how open source companies historically have operated, is this keeps us honest, right? The value that's being created here for our users is the ability to build faster and build repeatedly. It's not in the fact that you are stuck paying our fee to continue building on the platform. If it's not adding value, you take the generated application and you go. Now, of course, the reason our company has been able to continue growing is that most customers do find a lot of value in having the.
Honestly, when you don't lock people in, people, if they see value, I think the problem comes when you feel locked in and you feel like they're charging you for stuff you don't see value. But when you bring value to the world, people make money, right? You look at many open source companies are pretty successful. So you pretty much solve a lot of my initial concerns I had, and you heard my opening statement. So what else did I mention that was wrong or that you had to address? We talked about the lock-in piece, and just I have a great question here from Brad. I like you to answer it because it's pretty tied to the vendor lock-in. How do you define? I mean, I guess we kind of just did, right? You get the code, you can use that code without having any IP in it. You can augment the code and add to it, so you're not locked into the tool to augment that code. You can host it where you want to host it. You're generating containers so they can be used as Lego blocks anywhere. Is that how you define? Is that like checking the boxes of how you would describe lock-in? What else are we missing?
Yeah, so I think the two things to think about. There's the question first. If you were to make a change in strategy to walk away from a platform, can you continue operating the products that you have built on that platform? That's how we are talking about vendor lock-in in this case. And I think the answer for that is yes. Now, if you're building processes where you have non-technical users using this tool and you take away the tool, yes, you'll get people who are, that's saying, hey, give me another way to use this or to build this. And that's a different form of lock-in. That's sort of organizational process dependency that I think we, like any tool, aren't able to stop. But of course, most of how we are building and our customers are building is based on the idea that they can take what they've got if they want to and keep that IP inside their own organizations, which is a valuable place for them to be able to operate with us.
And how much of your product is built on open source? Are you using open source bits for your own capabilities?
We are. So both our own product and the apps that customers are building are based on open source. So customer applications that are generated on CrowdVotics are explicitly built using open source frameworks. Most typically, what we see customers choose to use is Django, which is a Pythonic framework for backends, React Native, and Vue for front ends. Sometimes you see Node and Java generated as well, depending on where you sit. We have, of course, our own repositories of open source code that have been contributed by our users or that have been culled
Oh,
from
so you
the
created a
open
mock.
source.
It's not really a marketplace because it's free, but it's like a repository of what modules and kind of capabilities. Or
These are modules and capabilities, yes.
so do you see just I know it's off topic, but I think it goes with what you just said. Do you see um, people in companies trying to have a repository like this for their internal use, and now you're providing that to them as well to be able to have their
Yes.
own closed? Yeah.
Yeah, so we see this happen now increasingly often inside organizations who are using Crowdbotics. First is that they will come up with their own modules that they want their own creators to build with inside their organizations. The second is
Right.
that they sometimes give us modules or ask us to create modules for them that they want others to use, specifically because they want their products to be discovered and identified. So
Yeah.
this is an interesting trajectory because it intersects to some extent with this question of discoverability, right?
Yeah.
You want to figure out ways that people inside organizations can use tools that have been sanctioned or blessed or audited and verified as secure by a centralized authority. But you also want people to have the freedom to create and customize and adapt solutions to their own needs. And this is a challenge. It's a challenge not just inside big organizations like the Air Force, but also inside organizations that are using open source. Because if you look at an open source package out there in the world, you have to ask first, is this going to cause security problems for us? Second, is this going to be IP licensed in a way that is good for us? And third, how do we make sure that the organization is going to be okay with having this piece of dependency added into our system?
Mm-hmm.
So organizations around the world are thinking about this in different ways. The Air Force's approach, actually, to some extent, is pretty good from the perspective of container discovery with the introduction of Iron Bank,
Mm-hmm.
which is a step in the right direction, to be sure. Understanding how to look at that one level down is the question that we're interested in, right? What are the
Yeah.
right components that you want organizations to allow their end users to use? How
Yeah.
do you, as an organization CIO, look down at that set of components that have been verified and say, here is our security profile with respect to these. Here is our set of dependencies that are being introduced by these open source packages. Here are the modules that we want people to use. And then here are components or solutions for specific activities like authentication or visualization that we want everyone to use. And that's a very difficult problem, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly a challenge when you are rolling out solutions that have this low code, no code flavor, because they require a lot of people who are not software engineers to start making decisions about what they should and shouldn't use.
Yeah.
And
And you see, so before you keep going, right? There's two questions that the public has, and I think goes very well with what you were talking about. So first, the looking aspect. There was a couple of companies that came out on the posts on LinkedIn when we announced the event, right? Some of your competitor, I guess, and they say, oh, we also don't have any lock-in because we generate. And just to remind everybody, no one is paying me to say anything here, and I'm not. This is not sponsored. There's no financial benefits of any kind. People know me, so I think that they know I don't do that kind of stuff. But just wanted to mention it anyways. So this is not like scripted or right. We didn't agree on what we were gonna talk about or anything. So those companies were saying, oh, my stuff generates Visual Studio code, and people can reuse that stuff, but your platform can do any language. That's there's a vendor looking to be stuck with one language, right? The fact that you can do pretty much anything is a big difference.
so we take an agnostic approach. I think that if you are a software engineer, being forced to use Visual Studio may not be your preference. And I think there is a trade-off between you as an organization may or may not want people to build in a certain framework or a certain language versus your engineers may say, you know, I really need a solution in language X. Long term, we take an agnostic approach. But of course, every organization that contributes code has to develop.
Organization will want to limit maybe that, but you as a platform, you don't limit people. You're not saying, hey, you have to use Visual Studio and .NET.
No, we don't have a specified forcing function. But I will say the majority of the users build on code that we've already got available for them, which means that they're choosing to use stuff that is in Django, React, React Native, Node.
Yeah, they go to the easy route, right?
Yeah. But of course, long term, our view here is that we want to be polyglots, right? So if you're coming in with a framework, a language that is different from what's already available, we shouldn't stop you from using the platform because you are unable to build in our preferred frameworks. And certainly, I think you're going to see that the trends in software frameworks and languages, because most of the modules that we've got here are crowdsourced, are going to reflect what people in the marketplace are asking for, right? So, in the enterprise, there is a bias towards particular frameworks in the open source universe, but we don't see the same thing in financial services or health or tech, which are the other places that we have large footprints and deployments. And so, yeah, there is I will also say nothing wrong with Visual Studio and exporting into
No. I made a lot of money in .NET. Okay, so Microsoft. I helped Microsoft launch the Microsoft Surface table, and I can tell you that was fun. So
I bet it was. Yeah, it's a good product.
Yeah.
Product.
Even I still have a company making money right now with it, so I'm not going to complain. But I'm just saying there is a vendor locking aspect of only pushing one language. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that over time, it is interesting for us to ask, what frameworks end up becoming the most popular. There is a question that's relevant for us. It's also relevant for many teams who are choosing what to build around on if they are betting on particular technologies or not becoming the choice, right? So we have made some choices here. I'm old enough to remember when Git was not the only solution for source control, but we bet on Git. It's a good bet. Yeah, and look, we've also bet on containers here too, and that's relatively recent as a strategy.
When I started in DoD, people thought I was trying to ship containers to Afghanistan. So shipping containers, and those were IT people, not just 4 stars in the military. So yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, for us, we have taken a stronger bet now on supporting the frameworks for creation that we are seeing commercial customers ask for, right? So Django, which is Pythonic, Node, which is JavaScript themed, React Native. These are overwhelmingly
a lot of work. That compounds your problem, right? That's just a lot of things to pull.
So it does and it doesn't. It does in the sense that we need to think about how these frameworks fit together. It doesn't in the sense that if we do our jobs right, our customers are giving us this stuff as opposed to us sitting down and building everything by scratch. And if you look at some of the stuff that's been contributed that is more experimental, right? Yes, people who are building.
How much stuff is contributed? Like, give us volumes. Like, what are we talking about in terms of how many modules or things were contributed back to your ecosystem?
So right now the majority of what is built on CrowdBotics today comes from around 500 different raw module parts, right? So these are covering major workflows, but we also have big volumes of open source repositories that have just been pulled down for available general use, right? So if you want to pull in an obscure framework, yes, you can pull that in and choose to use it if you want to. It doesn't mean that it's going to be bubbled up for everybody to use, but it means that you can pull in stuff. And of course, customers who are building their own code inside CrowdBotics are making use of quite a lot of stuff because we are looking at allowing people to build and commit in their own Git repositories. There is a pretty big universe of stuff that intersects with CrowdBotics, though a lot of that is locked up and private for customers to use on their own.
So Tim here had a good question on the fact that I assume each of these may have different licenses, right? I don't know if you mandate a specific license or not, but many open source licenses require what we call copyleft, right? So then people have to open source the rest of the application. And of course, most organizations don't want to do that. How do you alert people on the risk of that, and how do you manage that?
This is a really good question because copyleft licenses or viral licenses present a real problem for people who are building inadvertently. So we have deliberately excluded GNU, GNU Affero, and I think GPL v1 and v2 licensed code from any repositories that we scoop up and allow people to build with. We have a particular affinity for MIT licensed code and Apache licensed code because those two are generally regarded as safe for use. We also have an indemnification constraint. If people are pulling IP out of code that we give them, we are telling them that it's stamped approved by us, and we put our money where our mouth is by indemnifying it. So, so that's a pretty strong claim on our part, since we're assuming that IP risk. Now, there is of course, always the potential that somebody on their own, because we're not controlling or restricting what people commit in to their repos, will go in and break their own code in lots of ways. Right? The IP risk is one of the ways that they can break their own systems. If they choose to do that, that is a risk they will take.
There's so much you can do. Right?
Yeah. For the organization's point of view, though, I think that the interesting thing that we present or want to present for the CIO's office or for the person who's in charge of saying, is this okay, is some level of assurance that what they have done is okay. And so being able to say, for any of the libraries or modules that we've got, we can attest to the IP provenance is a pretty strong guarantee. When we get to the point of taking in entire containers, which we're not doing today, but which I would like to see us get to, it would be very nice to be able to make those similar kinds of attestations about the entire stack of applications.
The entire container. So you would have to do a full software bill of material of the container image.
Yeah, and that would be a pretty good guarantee, right? So this is one of the reasons things like initiatives like Iron Bank are really interesting for us, or other container registries are really interesting for us longer term, because they purport to provide fully contained functionality, which means that, great, we can pull down and certify an entire image, which is a much more powerful piece to give to people for something that they would pick up and use than just saying, take some parts. But of course, the audit there is much more difficult. So there's more work involved.
So let's talk about the problem number 2, right? Before we go into the bigger one, which is kind of the how do we limit everybody to build stuff in a vacuum, right? Let's talk about the DevSecOps process, right? Because you go into Git. Let's say I have a very specific pipeline for my containers, and I have all these scans I have to do. And for the Air Force, we're using Twistlock and Encore, and we're doing the SBOM, and we check the the CVs of these containers, and then we run it inside of Platform One Big Bang with our on Kubernetes construct, and the containers is just a Lego block on top. How do you integrate with that existing pipeline? Because if you look at some of the competition, right, that's my biggest issue I have with low code, no code, honestly, on top of the lock-in, is they completely have a shadow IT process of delivery, right?
Right.
And so that's just the worst. I mean, that's just like you have no clue what they really do. Very little, if anything, in security. Certainly much lighter than what we built, with the Platform One DevSecOps pipelines, gates. We have continuous monitoring gates. So that's the other thing, right? It's not just people think of it as a development thing, but for us, right, we run the stuff in runtime with our container runtime monitoring behavior, right? We have the service mesh to do the zero trust enforcement. So container A to talk to B has to be whitelisted. All this logic of whitelist and zero trust enforcement and ABAC and LBAC, all that is a whole different game, right? So how do you deal with not breaking kind of the DevSecOps process?
Yeah, this is a really good question, because I think the entire value of an alternative to low-code, no-code is predicated on the idea that we can play nice with an enterprise's existing workflows, which are sometimes well thought out, as is the Air Force's, about how you construct software in a trustworthy manner. So from our point of view, we plug in to an existing system in a few different places. So the initial code base that is generated when you build out a CrowdLogics application is constructed across a scaffold, which is a templatized structure with some decision variables about how you are constructing code bases for a given use case or a given organization. And organizations can define their own scaffolds, or we can use the scaffolds that we've got off the shelf. So the use of a scaffold allows us to make strong attestations or verifications about the initial state of a repository when it's generated. At that point, we support organizations' own methodologies for actually packaging the application, deploying the application into various contexts, and then certifying or verifying the application throughout its life cycle. So in a context like what you described, a user would start out with a certified scaffold where they have actually verified the construction of what's been created as a base application layer.
Just by the way, when you say scaffold, are you saying it's your own term, or is that the open source scaffold Kubernetes product? Just wondering.
No. Well, so this is these are not
the scaffold open source product. That's why I just want to make sure we're not confusing.
This is not the product brand.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
This is the generic software engineering.
The actual term. Okay. Just want to make sure, because there's a scaffold Kubernetes product. So.
Yeah, and I don't have a judgment pro or con on the Kubernetes scaffold, but what we're talking about is essentially application stand-up framework. So that certification or attestation is one point that an organization will look at. The deployment of the actual application, once the code base has been set up and modified by an initial user, is usually the next point. And organizations will typically deploy that into their own container environment, where they can actually do container scanning if they so choose.
You don't take over the CD piece, right? Usually people will have their own CD piece. Is that kind of how the delivery?
So we give you the choice, right? So we typically, for our non-enterprise users, people who are using stuff off the shelf, we just have a Terraform instance, you modify your CI/CD using infrastructure as code, and then you deploy it to wherever you want. And that's kind of the off-the-shelf choice. But if you are a more sophisticated organization, you will almost certainly set up your own custom CI/CD process here with rules in place for where you choose to deploy. And it's not none of our customers run on a private cloud that's kind of opaque. Everyone is running on commercial clouds or private clouds inside their own on-premise setups. So typically for our commercial customers, that is AWS, GCP, Heroku, or Azure. And for government customers, it's typically a deployment process that culminates with something either that is on-premise, if it is a highly secure system, or on GovCloud if it's one level down. And both of those have fairly strict processes that are required for ATO, which we try to play as nice with as possible. The reason we support that level of customizability on the CI/CD workflow is that it is a mandate inside any of the contexts that we operate in to do things in a way that somebody can generate an audit trail around each piece of software that's constructed. I will say that the Air Force is pretty good at this in terms of what the requirements have looked like. We also see this in the commercial side in healthcare and finance, which have their own unique requirements on each of those fronts, right? So, for example, in healthcare, there is an equivalent but different set of deployment requirements, which also requires strong attestations about how the software was constructed. Their verification is a little bit more bureaucratic and less scientific, I will say, but the premise is the same. And those are strong ways for us to be able to support custom deployability and custom verification of what has actually happened. For commercial users off the shelf, many folks just use the off-the-shelf CI/CD, which is it's fine. You get staging, production, development environments, workflows, and you can tweak those as you see fit. For high security contexts, you are deploying with your own custom CI/CD layer, which you can then publish across the organization.
So when people have their own CI/CD process, is it, you know, the build server, right, of the container, whatever is building the container in the first place, if that's compromised, as you can imagine, and we've seen it with SolarWinds, right?
Yep.
But they don't tamper with the code; they tamper with the build server, right?
Yeah.
That's obviously part of the Cron rule now. Do you see people asking for like rebuilding the container without using your build servers, or is that a thing? Can you do that?
Yeah, you can do that definitely. Customers who are concerned about this in high security contexts will build from source, right? So they will actually work with the Git repository itself, as opposed to using a build server on our side, which allows them to make sure that the actual generated container, the packaged build, is in an entirely in an infrastructure they control. Because if you look at the value chain for where a platform like Cradbotics or generally low code, no code is adding value, the build is maybe one component of it, and the build automation. But the bigger part is, can you get a less technical person to express their requirements in a way that is more precise before you hand over to software engineering? It's not necessarily that you have to have the non-technical person also control the build process, which is, you know, it helps for certain use cases, but it's also where you introduce the risk of vulnerabilities like this that you don't want. So for customers who are concerned about this, the right approach is you build from source, right? Use the non-technical user and the platform to generate a repository, because that is a readable, verifiable system. And then you build from there on top of that, right? So you take the repository in GitLab or GitHub, you build from there into a a container that is done in a trusted way. So there's not a requirement to use our build servers in that sense.
Okay. And I guess when you think of you know, the new I don't know if you've seen it, because you're not just focused on DoD like we are, but the president signed a cyber executive order that I kind of helped contribute to back when I was still in the job, and it's pushing, you know, zero trust and software bill of material. Of course, with zero trust, you know, for us we implemented Istio and you know, Service Mesh and mutual TLS tunneling and all that good stuff. So that's kind of changing the way you deliver, you know, the containers, and you have to create additional whitelists, and so it's adding complexity. But then on the other side, on the software bill of material, the SBOM, you know, now we have to provide, you know, each container has to come with, you know, the full SBOM package. Are you looking at helping in your part of the product to provide some of these things?
Yes. So good question. This looks a lot like what we see on the healthcare side of our business, where there are required attestations about what went into the software that I think platforms like Cradbotics should be able to speak to. The specific thing that is doable when you are generating code via a platform approach like this is the automatic generation of a verifiable bill of materials that states what went into the creation of the software. It's verifiable in the sense that if you are claiming that code, you know, component X was used, you should be able to point to this in a, you know, a programmatically verifiable way to give you a strong verification process that you can do at some scale. You also should be able to have a commit trail that you can verify for how the repo was constructed, so you know what actions actually led to each component being constructed in there. And then to the extent that you need to programmatically generate documentation that allows for testing to go in a way that is streamlined, I think that is a third value add that platforms like this should be able to add. The risk that comes when you are constructing software inside a large organization is that you don't know what went into it or who contributed to it, among others. Those are two specific pieces that if you are building using a platform that is allowing you to build from scaffolds and from modules, you should be able to do at some scale, right? Because if you can't verify what happened during the creation process, there is a a bigger risk that is generated. And so those are all strong places that we are interested in continuing to build around, because of the ability to generate these proof points during the overall build process. Now, there's other this doesn't obviate all the risks. Of course, you still have to have strong processes for verification downstream. You have to make sure what you're actually doing to harden your container is still world class, but you are able to speed up parts of this process and increase the ability to document what has happened. The bill of materials is, in particular, in my view, a really strong place where you should be able to make strong statements about what went into the process, which is quite useful.
And when you look at having to do all this work, right? I mean, literally, some companies will just focus their entire energy on generating SBOMs. Do you see a path where you partner with other companies, or you just build your own stuff for every of these features? That sounds like a lot of work.
It would be a lot of work, yeah. So our preferred model here is to partner, if we can, with folks who are producing good solutions and where those solutions fit in, especially when they are solutions that end up becoming superior to what we can construct in-house on our own, right? So there's a good solution suggested here. SBOM by Anchor and Security Compass. Solutions like this that plug in and that play nice. And look, the approach that we have taken here is to build on what is working out there in the world, right? Which is why we are integrating on many of the solutions that we've mentioned so far in the open source universe. But commercial solutions that let us make stronger attestations are really interesting, because if it's good enough for the Air Force, it's good enough for our commercial customers as well, which is a really good place to be.
Yeah, which is what a lot of people told me when they got their containers created on Iron Bank. Multiple healthcare and financial institutions started to use the containers from Iron Bank because they just felt like you said, if it's good enough for DoD, it's probably good enough for their business. So that's pretty cool. So we talked about vendor lock-in. We talked about a little bit of security and decoupling and CI/CD. Now, the next big one for me was the duplication of work, right? Do we really need to enable every? I mean, I get the concept of bringing domain expert, right? But every agile team will tell you that there is a way to bring out, domain expert into software development teams without having them to use low-code, no-code, right? I mean, that's just one avenue. But the fact is, you could also have them embedded part of a team and be part of the, in the user story definition and the engagement with the Scrum teams or whatnot, right? How do you see what's the right model, right? Because Air Force is massive, right? 800,000 people. Everybody needs to code.
This is the right question to ask, right? Because like you, I've heard differing points of view within the Air Force about do you really want every airman to be a coder, or do you want mission teams or squadrons to be empowered to solve their own problems? And I think between those two perspectives, you find the right answer, which is you need to have the ability for teams that are tasked with doing things that require technology to be able to come up with that technology on their own to a point where they are able to solve their mission needs. But then you also need pathways for that to be blessed by the broader Air Force, and to make sure that if you are building something, that it's has a pathway to standardization, to scale, and to roll out across the entire DoD, if that is the right solution. So I think
particularly when you have multiple wings kind of doing the same work, right? Then you have 20 teams, because that's, some organizations don't have that problem, but it's like if you think of UPS, right? And UPS has delivery center, and what if every UPS delivery center decides to build this delivery, software? I'm pretty sure that's not a good idea, right?
Yeah. So the Air Force has actually done some very interesting things in the last few years, probably under your and your colleagues' mandate, right? Which is to start engaging much more with modern technologies and to drive innovation efforts at scale. Right. So DoD has been investing heavily in SBIRs as vehicles to explore new technologies. they have been making really concerted outreach efforts, which I applaud, to Silicon Valley companies or to startups to try and discover interesting innovations and bring them in. And they've also been figuring out really effective ways to connect these into specific real needs that are currently being experienced by the Air Force at a operational and a wing context, which is all laudable. Up until the point when you ask the question, how do you make sure that each wing isn't coming up with their own solution? And how do you make sure that there's a pathway for the wing to take a solution that they have innovated and deploy it up to the broader Air Force, right? So that it becomes a good way to do this. How do you, and this is not a unique problem to technology. It is really, a problem that exists in large organizations, not just the Air Force. And I think there are some good pathways that have been discovered so far, right? So individual squadrons that we have been working with have been coming up with interesting solutions that they have been able to prove out at some small scale at their local wing context on cryptotics, which is great, right? So a good example is the work that we've been doing with Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. The 4th Training Squadron has come up with a solution for their mandate to, produce more pilots to accelerate, optimize the training process, to improve safety across the wing, to drive tactical innovation. They figured out a way to use crybotics to build an application to analyze data from flights, to put that into the feedback loop, and then to figure out ways to use that in an actual training context, right? Which is an innovation that exists specifically at that level, right? Now, the question is, how do you make sure that another base isn't actually doing the same thing, right? And this is where there's 2 approaches that you can take, right? The current approach is, it's base-to-base communication, right? Discussion within the community of instructor pilots. What is being built? How do you build it well? How do you make sure this is actually meeting the needs of different groups? But then there's the question of discoverability, right? Which is the longer term interesting question. How do you make it so that solutions like this become the actual way that people discover and build when they look into a platform? Can you see other solutions that have been produced by other teams? Can you figure out ways to pull down those solutions and build those out? All of those are interesting questions to ask for the longer term solution direction for tools like this. So that's my quick view. I think that seeing tools like this discovered by other teams is where you'd want this to go, maybe in a longer term context. And so figuring out ways to do that at scale, it's an interesting question, and one that we want to try and solve for if we can.
No, absolutely. That's a very good point. So, when you think about the great success story from some of the teams, right? The issue we face, for a department as big as the Air Force is I couldn't even find who is doing what, with the paid custom software, right? Like very expensive engagements, and I couldn't even get a list of capabilities being built across the Air Force and Space Force. So you can imagine, smaller teams that do low code, no code effectively, that makes it even almost impossible, to track. How did you enable with some organizations that are sharing, if at least we can do it centrally with some type of oversight? Is there an organical way, right? Like you talked about that repository, right, that you created. Is that a way for people to at least be aware that work is being done? And then how do you deal with, do you think then we should really push for a single low-code, no-code solution to be used? Because you just compounding the problem, right? If we have 5, 6, 7, 8 different low-code, no-code platforms that we have to track, right?
Yeah, so discoverability is going to be a hard problem inside any organization at the scale of the Air Force. It's the same problem that's being experienced inside commercial users as well. There are a few different ways that I think this could be solved. One approach that is potentially interesting is the use of systems like Iron Bank or other container repositories that enable deployment and discovery as a standardized part of the process. And now you don't have the problem of finding out what everyone has done. You only have the problem of enforcing this standard that everyone is pushing their stuff into a common repository. Crybotics on its side, because we're built around Git repositories as our main mechanism for coordination of what is built, allows users to see other repositories that have been built or created by users inside your organization, and you can see the applications that are being built by other teams. But of course, if you're looking across lots of technology initiatives, not just things that are built inside a Git model, if you're asking about how do you discover the work that's been done by other low-code, no-code solutions, I think you have to figure out a way to force folks to, as part of the culture and practice, publish into a common location to allow people to discover somewhat organically what is going on elsewhere. So the proposal here, to get everyone into a container registry, it works pretty well if you can get people to do it.
Well, not all of the low-code, no-code platforms can do that, right? So
yeah, and I mean that's one of the challenges here is fractional usage of these tools. If everyone buys a different solution and those solutions are all ones that require lock-in, now you have a fraction.
Which is exactly, by the way, what we have right now, right? We have probably every low-code, no-code platform used in the Air Force somewhere.
Yeah, and so you will see if some
do you think that's a problem? I mean, do you think that's a good idea?
Well, look, I have a bias here because we have a specific view that buying niche expensive solutions where the government doesn't own the IP for what is actually being constructed is a risk. It's a budget problem, but it's also a risk in the sense that Team X is locked into contract for niche solution Y forever.
Yep.
Which is it's not a great position for DoD to be in long term. But there are ways that this can be, and I will also say, if that is the right solution for a given team to solve their problem right now, of course it is better to some extent that they just get a solution in to solve that problem than it is for them to say, we're not going to have this capacity or this capability when we're, in a mission context. But if we have the ability to plan, I think taking an approach that has some degree of flexibility that allows people to say, we are going to pick solutions that don't have the same lock-in, and that allow us to adapt to our own needs, gives us a place where we can standardize what's happening in various places. One thing I'll note is that the Air Force's software factories, right, they're pretty sophisticated in their use of solutions, right? And they generally have been very effective at coming up with solutions that look more like the standards in core software creation than buying low-code, no-code solutions. And so that could be another route that could be taken, depending on how effectively teams are able to make use of the solutions produced by those software factories, is to route some of what's happening through there. That's just one possibility that might be interesting.
That's a good thought right there. So lots of people have questions. So let's see. Did we miss? We covered the redundant piece, the lock-in, the security piece. I have a good question here. I have a lot of good questions here. So let's bring a few of them. Okay. All right, let's start with Cody here. Has a pretty good question on what does day 2 support looks like for low-code, no-code apps. Do they have to transition over, or there's an effective issue bug fix process built in? That's particularly a good question also when the initial team that built the app is gone, right? The whoever was using your beautiful low-code, no-code stack is now deployed elsewhere in Russia or Ukraine, and what are we gonna do?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that there's two things that we have seen so far as typical outcomes on the commercial side and on the government side, which is either customers will choose to transfer to an in-house team because the application is now mature and in a position where in-house teams might need to adapt or modify what's being created. Um, and option two is you just coordinate with the company that provided it to give you support, which is what a lot of our commercial users do, which is to buy support from us on an ongoing basis. We don't have a bias towards one or the other. I think that organizations should do what is right for them. If that means taking it to an in-house team to scale and maintain, great. That is a great outcome for that product having a life cycle. If it means coming to us for support or for extension, great. That's also a good place to be. We programmatically push updates to a lot of software applications for customers who are on the commercial side for that specific reason, so that they don't have to deeply maintain it and develop it over time. And of course, that's where I think there is value creation for any company that is creating software where the IP is owned by the customer. So those are good places to think about it. I think that the solutions that maybe work less well is saying, well, support requires deep lock-in, or day two support is going to be carried out by non-technical folks forever. Those are harder places to be. You want non-technical users to be able to use the tool on its own without needing to worry too much about how it actually works under the hood. But you also want to make sure that technical teams can operate these systems without having continued reliance on the creation company. So that's how I think about it. I'm curious to see what your perspective is on this as well.
No, I think you're pretty fair. So far you've been pretty fair. So I'm a little disappointed because we're not really fighting too much. So I was ready for the fight, and now I'm kind of sad. So, but another question that kind of is tied to all of this is, what are the limitations you think of using a low-code, no-code like at what point would you say, hey, this is too complex, and this kind of mission application you need to build should be better suited to be built using custom software?
Okay, yeah. So this is maybe if you want a point of disagreement, I'll give you one right here. So I think
you're gonna say never. Don't say never.
Well, so I actually think that if you're taking the approach we are taking, you can always start with a CrowdBotics application. You don't ever need to start with raw code, specifically because yes, there is a point where you're going to want to go and walk away from visual build tools or modular build tools and walk into instead, let's go commit code in the repository and work directly with software engineers. But I never think you need to start in that position, because even if you were a software engineer sitting down to scope out, the first day of your team's build, you are going to look at what existing software frameworks you're building on. You are not going to sit down and say, let me just start writing from scratch. And so the question here of how to get from 0 to 1 fastest, that is the place where a platform like ours is the right place to start. If you're looking for places where the question is always, when do you make the switch away from the platform to going and building lots of custom stuff? And that's a place.
What if it's okay? So what if it's a jet? I'm gonna build the next generation jet fighter. Am I gonna start with your stack?
Well, it might be a lot cheaper than what it costs to build the joint strike fighter, right? So I think that there are ways that you can accelerate.
Do you guys like support non-x86 and like embedded system stuff? I mean, most people use low-code, no-code usually for like web-based stuff. Have you had any customer use your stuff for like embedded systems?
So we do have some customers who have built embedded system stuff. It's not the majority of what we do.
Sure,
and, I will say that the approach, in theory, should allow you to do more work of that type. We usually see those kinds of things over in like IoT applications or healthcare systems. To be clear, the DoD doesn't use us for embedded systems work. But I think in theory, there's no reason you couldn't. The reasons you would do
But
that.
doesn't it hurt yourself then to be tied to low code, no code, to the category? I mean, don't you almost need a new category for what you've been building? Because honestly, you're kind of addressing all of the issues of low code, no code. So you being called a low code, no code platform is probably hurting you more than it is helping you. I don't know.
Well, I think that the reason that it's interesting as a category, right? And as much as I would like to see us, I would love to see us create.
You don't want to have your own category on the beautiful quadrant.
So I would love to see Gartner and the universe of folks out there create a category around what is happening here, because I think there is a movement that is coming that is replacing low code, no code.
How would you call it?
Let's
coin it. We can't coin it today. You know, Gartner is watching this show.
Well, if they're watching, I'll tell you how we talk about it internally, right? So low code, no code is a black box. Platforms like Crowdbotics are clear boxes, right? So you can see what is actually being constructed. So clear box systems like this do make a difference in how people build software. And clear box is the point, right? You can actually see what is being constructed, which is what you and I care about, you know, when we're looking at the security question or the ownership question or the extensibility question.
But it's also your stuff is not just low code, no code, because you can extend it with actual code. So yes, you can start easy and start with the UI and modules and stuff, but you could extend it. So really, you can do any code, right? I mean, it's simpler, but it doesn't stop. You're not stuck in low code, no code forever.
Yeah. So the approach is characterizing it as low code, no code is a good reference point for people who are coming in from the outside and they're looking at those systems. But this is
how
like
would you call it? What's the name? What's the name?
Clearbox is a good system. Clearbox software development is a good way to characterize it. But look, if Gartner is watching, then they can come up with a proposal for this. Or if you have an idea how you want to call it, let's.
I mean, certainly, I think you deserve a separate category, right? Because you from what you've told, and we're assuming you're not lying to us, and you're correct. But we'll trust you today. And if that's the case, I think you kind of checked most of my concern. I still believe, the redundant work and that is just not something that's up to you to address. I mean, you're helping with catalog and stuff, right? But the implementation, it's almost like I would probably recommend having only one solution for an enterprise, and like you said, there are features in life where we don't want to have options, just like single sign-on and some of the cyber stack we demand to have. People keep dismissing that, mostly because of lack of understanding of the tech side, but also ego and silos. But I can tell you, I had so many fights just when it comes to telling people, hey, we should probably not have 26 identity management stacks and shadow ITs. And it's common. I mean, wouldn't you say it's common sense on the commercial side? Don't you think CIOs agree on the commercial side that you probably don't want to have 50 ICAM stacks?
So this is the real place where I think having the ability to give people the feeling of freedom when they are creating software without letting them go off and pick for things that honestly they are not going to do better than what has been chosen by the organization. You don't want them picking their own identity management solution, right? Because unless there is truly an obscure use case that requires deviation from the norm, that's a place where the organization should be able to specify standards and have those standards adopted when people are constructing applications. Identity management is my favorite example of this, but there's lots more because
there's many cyber ones, that's for sure.
Yeah, people can go off track really easily, but you also need people to have enough freedom and know where those.
Some you can have a couple, some it's one, some it's a couple, some it's 50, right? I think but you have to. I actually did an exercise when I was building JADC2 to define what should be one, what should be 2, 3, 4 options. If you look at policy enforcement point and zero trust, you probably don't want to have 50 of those. There's just a few things like that where it's pretty common sense that you want one, and then some you could have 2 or 3, and some you want 50, right?
Yeah. So letting people pick from a menu, right, is the place that you want them to land, right? Here are the approved choices. Build it using any of these that you like, as long as it's one of these, and then making sure that they have enough choice in there that they can get their specific needs met. And now you have a good middle ground. so that when you end
So
up
do you
with
see people do that, like limiting ICAM on your, on your product? People have an ability to say, hey, for authentication, you have to use this one module here.
Yeah, so that's a typical workflow that we see, right? So in the open source universe, right, there are probably 100 different packages that purport to offer identity management, even SAML 2 based identity management, right?
Right.
And there's maybe 10 of those that are actually correct, usable, verified, supported by the company involved, IP licensing is okay, secure. And so restricting in that way is one of the core reasons that organizations that are creating applications at scale would use CrowdBotics, because they can whitelist particular application modules and say, this is the one that we want people to use. And of course, if people go off script, there is now
I mean, people can always cheat the system, right? But the key is to make it hard for them to do that, right?
Yeah, you make it you want the easiest way that they operate to be
to be the right one.
The system the normal way, right? And then you can end up in a pretty good position with respect to being able to verify what people did and making sure that what was done was known. So.
All right, so we have more questions, and this one is actually pretty interesting. Do you know of any standard for artifact generation, like XML template or YAML for the local no-code front? Anything that enable documentation codification of anything built, GUI, local no-code tools, so that work can be captured, version control, and documented in a standard version control fashion? I guess you do that with your product pushing into Git, but that's not across products, right?
Yeah, so this is actually a really good question. And actually, I can give you a partial answer here, but I'd want to hear what Nic has to say about this too, right? So broadly speaking, across all artifacts that could be constructed, no, I don't know of a standard. For specific artifact flavors, there are standards that we adhere to by default. And I think it would be great to get better standards in place. So for example, API generation via a platform like CrowdBotics. We generate documentation programmatically with test case programmatically, right? Which allow you to, in a standardized way, follow like Swagger documentation for an API. And that's our default. And that's pretty good in the sense that an engineer will read that and say, okay, I know what this API does. And then I can verify this by looking at the code, at the pointers that are there and the test cases. And I can actually ping this service and get responses as documented. We also programmatically generate repository documentation in the form of READMEs and explanations for where to find what code, as well as ways to look at the actual structure of how to run the application, deploy the application, and so on by default. But what I would love to see is a standard here that is more universal than what exists today. Because it would be really beautiful if we could just say, like, with a strong guarantee, looking at a documented repository across any organization, like, here's the standard that this application adheres to for self-documentation, and then engineers follow that standard as well when they're generating stuff on their own. But what I've seen is practically there's a lot of different standards across different organizations for how they want material documented. And that standard varies in ways that are sometimes followed very strictly and sometimes followed very poorly by organizations. So,
I guess people try to do that with APIs, right? With Open API, and there are different, even augmented version of it to add more information. SBOM would do some of that for the bit of material side. There's three main formats that were kind of recognized. And I like the Linux Foundation one, SPDF or whatever, XF, whatever the format is. They always have pretty cool acronyms. Let's see, what is it? SPDX. Here we go. But I think there's definitely maybe something to push to the Linux Foundation or CNCF to start thinking of something like this, right? The issue is what kind of, I think you're in a good spot for you as a company to adopt something like this. I would argue for the other guys, it's going to be a lot of work. I don't think their infrastructure is designed to even think of it this way, right? So it's a pretty big lift. I would assume, but I don't know.
Well, I'm interested to see if some standards emerge. Certainly, SBOM is one that allows us to go in a particular direction, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. All right, so 2 more questions that we got for the public here that are pretty good. So Cody, again, always good question from Cody. Are there any applications of low-code, no-code migrating, refactoring to brownfield apps? Or greenfield apps, I guess.
Brownfield is the specific use case. So this is actually really of interest. We actually had some discussions with groups inside DoD about this specific topic, because if there are applications that have been built that are built against a prior generation standard for security or for utility, in many cases, there's deep and urgent organizational interest in refactoring. So a lot of the refactor that we do in these contexts is heavily manual. And that's okay. Like, we have a services team that works directly on this. The goal of refactors of brownfield applications is typically to bring them up to a modern standard and then make them interfaceable with a no-code, low-code, or a Crowdbotics type model. Meaning you have now enabled less technical users to make basic modifications to the application. You have verified that it is up to the standard expressed by the organization for DevSecOps, and you can plug it into a DevSecOps pipeline. So this retrofit can be very useful. We approach it from a import of the source repository of the original application perspective, systematically documenting what we are trying to construct, and then converting each piece by piece, into a modern framework. It's really interesting from a commercial context, because there are many, many more, not surprisingly, brownfield applications that need help to get up to the modern standards that are required by organizations than even ideas for new applications that people want. And I think that we have seen demand for this. We are addressing some of that demand, but there's lots more to do. What I would love to see happen here, and this is still in the future for us, it's not something we do today, is programmatic assessment algorithmically of an existing application and automatic conversion of components, right? So can we do things
that must
like
be pretty difficult.
you have to think about it. So it would, but let's put on our researcher hats, right? You do
you're a PhD, I can't do that, so
well, you do some kind of static analysis on the repository, right? You do programmatic service discovery, right? You say, hey, are there parts of this that actually can be done and pulled out like whole and reused? Which parts are not going to be up to our standards because there's no identifiable README? And yes, then there's going to be some manual work. You could also do things like ask the question, could we take this existing repository and package it, right, into a deployment container with some assumptions? You run down a script of choices to try out, like package it this way, this way, this way, and then, get to an end outcome. So I think there is interesting possibility of doing that in the future. We don't do that today. We do a lot of this work manually. But I really love this approach because it is such an important problem. Like, if I were to ask, and this is from the outsider's perspective, like, what is one of the potentially big risk factors for enterprise organizations today? It's that they have all this legacy code that is no longer maintained, poorly maintained, running mission critical infrastructure, potentially insecure, not up to speed with modern development practices. Being able to do that systematically at scale without saying, let's take our core engineering team and go start working on old code is a really valuable place to play. So we do some of this right now. I think there is a big opportunity here at scale. And I think there's also the possibility for technical innovation to do some of this programmatically. And it's not a sexy problem, but it's so important because of
it's a big problem.
Yeah, because of how big the code universe is of stuff.
A lot of people are trying to solve that one. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
a lot of people I don't know if it's ready. I mean, I guess it could be done. I think it's a massive lift, but I'm pretty impressed with what you built so far. So I guess if someone can do it, Maybe it's you guys. In fact,
Well,
you didn't tell us how big is the company and where are you guys based, and tell us a little bit about the company.
yeah, so I'll give you the, we're 5 years old, 60 full-time people. We've got $28 million raised from venture capital. We are headquartered in Berkeley, California, but actually we are, since the pandemic, fully remote, distributed all over the country.
Most companies, yeah.
Coast to coast.
Are you going to go back, or are you going to stay remote?
We will stay remote forever. We are actually patterned after another USAF vendor in this respect, GitLab, which is well known.
Yeah, but they started remote before the pandemic, though. So that's
yeah,
they were
ahead of the curve here. I think that you hear big tech companies are sometimes thinking about going back to the office, but we employ people in lots of different states. And I think there's this idea that has been blown up now in Silicon Valley that all the best software engineers are in Silicon Valley. No, that's not true, right? There are great software engineers all over the country. The problem is that many companies just did not look in the rest of the country, and so they missed out on having great talent. And so we are really happy to be distributed in this way, and I think we will continue forever if we can. It's nice also not to have a commute.
Do you see any downside being remote, though? I mean, for me, it's always tough, right? I think some people are missing also talking to people, and there are plenty of online tools that I forgot the name of that tool where you can have a virtual room and you can create spaces and you can go and play and whatnot.
So there's two real challenges, I think, when you are operating fully remote. The first is this question of how you can cultivate a strong interpersonal dynamic between people on the team. And usually what you do is you bring people together for meetups, and then you give them spaces to interact informally, like the one you alluded to, right? There's many platforms you can just have a virtual office, you walk around and meet people, or you can create those through structured social activities. The other is this question of discoverability, which is similar to what you described. How do teams know what other teams are doing, and how do you make sure there are enough informal interactions, that there's communication and discoverability about ideas, problems, challenges? And that takes a lot of coordination, because there's no physical place to say, go see what that person's working on or drop in on, that physical discussion. So those are places where having good, making sure you're making judicious use of meetings, right? Inviting teams for cross-pollination, and then having programmatic systems of record that you can look at to identify and understand what the state of affairs is in a different team. And those are, I suspect, going to become the new normal for most groups in tech, whether or not they are us, or whether or not they're permanently remote or partially remote. The third thing, of course, there's some dependency you get on online tools. Like this morning, there was a Slack outage, right? And can you have continuity of business practices in places where collaboration tools are imperfect? And usually the answer is yes. You come up with those models. But of course, the upside is real, right? I mean, being able to work with talented people from all over the country is a real advantage compared to just hiring people within 100 miles of downtown San Francisco.
You think it's easier when you already have a plot? I mean, I would just think if you create a new startup tomorrow, right? And you're starting from scratch, it's very difficult, right? You don't, you have to hire a bunch of people, you don't know them, so you have no rapport, no existing culture. I think it's easier when you move with an existing team, right, than starting fresh and from zero. I think I would have a tough time creating a new company and be completely remote from day one. I think I don't know.
I think it depends on how comfortable you are with being able to set up a team culture that is distributed from the get-go. And certainly your initial team will have to have a structure that is supportive of being able to get stuff done and advance technology, product,
Don't you lose efficiency though, than not being in a whiteboard and like sitting together in a room and for the first few months of creating a product? I don't know. I feel like you have to be there.
We do a lot of virtual whiteboards. We use a lot of collaboration.
I guess I'm not used to those yet. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that having been doing this now for over two years almost remotely, we are very comfortable with this model, and I think we will continue to scale on this model for as for as long as we are able. I think there is a little bit of a some groups overvalue co-location in the sense that yes, you do see some increased conversational efficiency from having people in the same room, but a lot of that can be mitigated through having good mechanisms for discussion, interaction, and there's a real immediacy you get from tools like Slack, right? If you have an idea.
Yeah, so you think the tech can compensate, but don't you think people want to be with people? I mean, I know at some point I was getting crazy now talking to people in real life, right?
Well, a lot of folks who work here will go to an office, co-working space, right? And a lot of teams here will also get together physically.
Yeah, so you do meetups and stuff. How often would you do that?
Well, the pandemic got in the way of a lot of our planned sort of company-wide meetups, but a lot of teams have gotten together.
So you do smaller things, right?
Yeah. So far, we've seen teams get together, and I think the right cadence for an annual, assuming that things continue to improve on the pandemic front, I would love to see our team get together as a company at least once a year, because that's a good way for everyone to make sure that we are strongly aligned, beyond just faces on a screen, which is often.
Come on, with all that real estate cost you're saving, you can do twice a year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, physical office space, was a very big expense at my first.
I know. I'm putting you on the spot now. You're gonna have to do two. Okay.
Oh, well,
so and the pandemic is done. We need to move on. Well done. Let's move on. All right. I have another question here. Whitney was asking, how do you partner with the DoD currently?
Yeah, sure. So we're currently working with a number of bases. One of the use cases we talked about was the work that's happening over at Seymour Johnson, which was funded under a SBIR Phase 2. It looks like the use case has real legs. It's currently deployed out on the Strike Eagle. We were looking at expanding this out to 2 additional bases to run on the MQ-9 and the F-16 as part of their training and optimization regimen. And then, ideally, we will scale this up to roll out to the broader U.S. Air Force, depending on how continued adoption of the solution that was pioneered there goes. There's also
how do you go after that, right? How do you go after? You have federal salespeople. How do you go after expanding this?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great question, because I think this is one of the places where, as much as I love the amount of work that the Air Force has done to engage startups through innovation.
There's no easy way for you to be in touch with the teams, right?
Yeah. So contracting with the Air Force at small scale has become much easier. To get solutions adopted broadly, there's a lot of legwork that is involved, and we're not a gigantic DoD vendor. We are a startup, and so there is work involved for us to go out.
Are you partnering with resellers that help you do that?
We might. We've had some initial discussions here, but I think the reseller approach is one approach we'll take. We're also going to go talk directly to groups inside big Air Force, right, to see which.
Yeah, but then you're gonna need someone full time.
Yeah, we are. So it's likely we're going to expand out our DoD.
So I guess if any member of the audience is interested to help you, right, they should reach out.
Well, yeah, please do. You can email me
That's what I
directly.
was aiming at getting you. But you didn't take the bait, so I'm gonna be more obvious.
Also, I'll say this, right? This is a place where we are, of course, interested in having conversations, both with folks who want to either help us resell directly, folks inside Big Air Force who want to come and talk to us about the solution, either the overall solution or the specific solutions that have been pioneered at individual bases, or if you want to join our team as a any of the above engineer, federal reseller, we're excited to talk.
BD, yeah. So you managed. So we have two more questions, and we'll take that. But you kind of managed to convince me to agree that what you built, it's not. I would not call it a local no-code platform again, because I don't think most of them follow your vision here. But I would agree with you that what you built is pretty solid. I think I would not have issues with people in the Air Force using it at scale. I would actually recommend that people don't have a bunch of other things, because I would argue most of the other platforms probably don't have the flexibility you're talking about. And checking, I think you kind of check all the boxes for me. I don't think you could improve much more without becoming bloated or becoming too opinionated or whatnot. So this is pretty cool. So in fact, Team was asking, and I guess that's a good question I was going to ask too, is you must have some limits of your platform. So what are those?
Yeah, so I think the right questions to ask, this is the right question to ask of any solution like this, right? And the way I would characterize this is when you have a solution like ours that is allowing people to go back into code, the real question here is, how much can you build towards your solution before you are forced to go into code? Because obviously you cannot replicate the entire universe of code inside a build platform.
I thought you were pretty good.
Code gives you unlimited customizability, right? And so that's the right question to ask. We're continuing to push the limitations on what you can build on the platform, but there's lots of places where if you are picking a framework that is different from something where we've got lots of modules, or where you are trying to generate a particular visualization, for example, you will be asked to go back and say, go build this in software, right? And we will not be shy about saying this is the right way to build it on Crybotics, because if you are allowing people to customize as much as they need to get their solutions built, you will eventually ask people to go and build in real code, as opposed to using these limitations or to look at the limitations there. So that's the easy way to think about it. And hopefully, as we continue forward, we continue to expand the limits of what is possible.
Yeah, pretty cool. I like the fact that you can extend. I mean, that's a game changer too. So, all right, last questions. Then I know we're gonna let you go because that's been a long day. So, all right. So, there seems to be a thought that since IT was created by business, if business can solve problems, at least the smaller and medium-sized problems, then IT needs to take a backseat and educate the business instead. I love it. I think it's pretty spot on, right? But in some businesses, though, IT is the business, right? I mean, it depends, right? I mean, if you look at you're an IT business, so I guess it's one and the same. But for most other businesses that are not just IT focused, I guess that's a pretty good smart way of putting it, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that there's the challenge that many IT teams face is shadow IT. And this education question is the right
and
one.
Compliance and security and
yeah, like how do you prevent the business from, as much as you want to empower them, how do you prevent them from going off and introducing a bunch of security holes or compliance gaps you have to clean up? So it's a good framing, I think, of the challenge that exists.
Yeah, that's kind of spot on. I like it. All right, so first, I'll leave you the last words, but I'm gonna remind everybody to register for the show at ama.preventbreach.com/register and follow us on LinkedIn. Also, I wanted to remind everybody of the dates of the next episodes coming next week with March 1st, which will be a pretty amazing episode. No offense, but we're gonna have the Air Force Chief Information Officer Lauren Nossenberger join us on Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we're going to get Jay Bonchi, the Air Force and Space Force CTO, And then, the 15th, we're going to get Raja, the CEO of Timo, who is also engaged in since the beginning of Platform One. So pretty cool. And I have more dates, but I'm not going to divulge everything. Otherwise, it's going to be too exciting. And I don't know if you guys can take it. So I'm going to keep it close hold for the other attendees. But like I said, if you have people you want to recommend, please make sure you shoot us a note on LinkedIn. So we have, and by the way, if you know Anand people from the commercial side, I'm tired of DoD people. No offense, but I love to get a little bit of opinions outside of the DoD bubble. So if you know any CEOs or whatnot that want to share a little bit their journey, I'd love to get some names. And I leave you the last words for you. And if you want to share people, help give people where to connect with you to be able to follow up if they have interest in the solution, in helping you resell, partner, all of the above, let them know.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks. It's been great catching up here. If you want to check us out, take a look at our website, crowdbotics.com. You can, if you want to implement the solution or talk to us about implementing the solution, click the button right there that says, talk to us. Fill out the form. We'll get back to you right away. And of course, if you want to find me online, I'm pretty accessible. I'm right there on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from anyone who's watching, and we as a company would love to hear from anybody who wants to come and try out the solution. So excited to hear from folks in the audience.
And like Matt said, you got my stamp of approval. So, and it is a high bar. So
thanks. That's great. Always great to have.
Yeah. So thanks so much for joining the show, and we learned a lot today. I hope everybody had a great session. We'll catch up next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern. And in the meantime, everybody stay safe and keep coding.